Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I hope everyone is having a wonderful Wednesday. Today we're going to be painting the Ankheg. I chose two different models for this, and I wanted to paint up at least two of the walking models for the Ankheg. The first model is a crawling one, and it looks a lot like some sort of an alien ant. I love all the spiny ridges and the oversized mandibles. It looks a lot like a leafcutter ant, but you can imagine getting an arm or leg sliced off with those mandibles and it not being a very pleasant experience. The second model is a throwback to the 2nd edition Advanced D&D Ankheg. It's also what I would use if I was having like an ambush encounter. While the details of that model aren't as crisp, I like the huge alien bug eyes, and it really reminds me of playing the original Baldur's Gate when I was a kid. I can remember going through that field, that farmer's field, and having those Ankhegs pop up and shoot acid at my characters, and they go down to like half health, and I'd immediately try to pause it and say, what the heck is going on here? The first time it really scared me because they were kind of powerful for that game. The Ankhegs in that game really were wicked, but they give you some really good materials for heavy armor. So I was kind of trying to do a little throwback here with that. Well, without further ado, straight on to the description of the monster. Ankheg. Ankhegs are burrowing creatures, and the monster manual says that they have hooked, spiny legs for grasping and puncturing, and then trapping their prey. It also says that their mandibles can slice through small trees with ease, so I can imagine getting your arm or leg or even torso snapped off by one of these things isn't too out of the ordinary. They are ambush predators, but they don't drag their prey down after hooking them with their mandibles. Instead, they secrete sprays of acid, kind of like a housefly, which pre-digests their unlucky victim. Oh, that's just awful. Could you imagine being trapped in this hole and you just start to sink down it, and all you see is just bubbling acid underneath, and meanwhile they're ripping and tearing and gulping whatever it is that they're digesting with their enzymes? Or imagine you're a shepherd standing in a field. All of a sudden you hear a sheep bleat. You watch in horror as something latches onto it, and then it starts to melt halfway into the ground. Crushing and grinding noises can be heard as its victim tries to escape its grasp, so you hurry over. When you get over to it, half of the victim's body above ground is untouched and the other half is melted away and chewed off, and the creature's gone. Sizzling acid bubbles around the hole in the ground, so you don't even want to go after it, because even though these things are large size class, like about as big as a horse, doing so would get you burned pretty badly and going in the hole that has acid in it. They are known as lurkers in the earth and the bane of field and forest. Actually, these things have a lot of really good nicknames. They remind me of very successful horror movies which put the main character in a large open field of knee-high grass on a sunny day with the wind caressing that grass and nice little bursts. You know, the scene where the protagonist is walking across the field and the birds are chirping. It's a balmy 60 degrees and the sun is nice and warm overhead. And that's when the killer strikes, when the viewer is off guard and surprised to be caught out in what appears to be a safe environment. One of the first movies that I remember this happening with was actually a movie called 30 Days of Night. And I know that was about vampires, but it was really, really surprising. And it actually jump scared me in the movie theater, because there was a woman who, spoilers by the way for this, 20-year-old movie or whatever, but there's a woman who was like doing dishes inside as the sun was going down, and it was just about to be like the first day of night in this horror movie, and it was brightly lit. She's just kind of like standing there doing her thing, and all of a sudden the glass breaks and something grabs her, drags her out, and just away. You're completely caught unprepared, because it doesn't feel like the type of place where an ambush would take place. And that's what I kind of think about when I think about Ankhegs. It also says that they eat dirt and they receive some of their nutrients from the earth, but that they need fresh meat to survive. So they're kind of like, we have chickens, and so they're kind of like chickens, I guess, in this aspect. They're never said to be particularly smart, and I definitely can see that. They only have an intelligence of 1, so they're even less than like animal cunning. but they also have this nickname called the Bane of Rangers and Farmers. Could you imagine if you were a farmer and this thing started attacking your crops? Like, what would you do to even trap it? It would be so difficult. Their favorite food is whatever happens to be in the flock around the fields, and they don't have to worry about being trampled if they cause a stampede away from their kill site like most predators do, because they're underground and everything is running away from the kill site. It does say that they leave partially collapsed tunnels as they burrow, so you might find all kinds of goodies in there. Like, just think, if you're a shepherd and you're losing one of these things every maybe week or two to your flock, how many others of your flock are like stepping into these holes left by these things and breaking legs, or, it's a real hazard for both the shepherd and the animal itself. They apparently don't digest metal, so you might find some coin, parts of their shell, or even maybe some eggs or eggshells in their burrows if you actually go down there. There's all kinds of neat goodies in there. As a player, this kind of is a risk-reward thing, because you go down that tunnel and you're not quite sure what you're finding. You're maybe trying to track this thing, but you could really reward a player who has that gumption with some shinies, some coins, or maybe even a magic item or something like that. This is kind of the quintessential creature for a DM to use in low-level campaigns. The threat is just right for a farmer or shepherd to be unable to handle, and for local law enforcement to just not want to waste time tracking the thing down, or to just look at it and say, nah, you're on your own, buddy. You call me when you have somebody breaking into your house. I could just see a local sheriff looking down one of those holes and thinking to themselves, this seems like an adventurer thing, not really a sheriff thing. They are CR2, and they have a decent chunk of hit points, so when you are in a combat with it, everyone is going to be able to get a good couple of smacks on them, or spells or whatever, before the battle is over with. They have sort of a so-so armor class, not super low like zombies, but not super high like animated armor, so everybody's going to have a pretty good chance of hitting this thing and doing some damage. It'll feel good, especially because you can describe things like, if the barbarian with a two-handed sword comes in slashing, you can say that its sword cracks the shell and, sprays of goopy purple liquid start to spray out from it, and maybe it squeals and shoots acid at the player that hurt it, things like that. You can get real descriptive with bugs like this, I think. As a DM, one might feel compelled to make this creature really nasty by giving it strategy, but remember that it has a less than animal intelligence. Its intelligence is actually a 1. I don't think that it would use cunning or strategy except for in its initial attack, and I think it would continue to fight until it died, because it is an apex predator for its chosen hunted grounds. It would view anything that attacks it as something trying to muscle in on its territory, another apex predator, and would just try to kill it mindlessly. I mean, it might retreat if given the option and is damaged enough, but I'd say even chance that it would just get angry and try to attack even more, or confused, or just act like an animal and double down on pure force. Ultimately, also, nobody has to feel bad about putting this monstrosity down, and it is a monstrosity. It isn't an animal, and it's not natural, so to druids, it wouldn't be a part of the natural ecosystem. It would be a predator that was introduced that would throw off natural ecosystems, because it doesn't have really another thing that preys on it. It isn't intelligent and has no culture or purpose other than solitary hunting, and taking it down would make the PCs sort of a local hero, as they are considered to be great nuisances in a community. Though a sunny field or a shady forest is where I would choose as a DM to put this thing, I could also see these being a good monster in the Underdark. They fit the aesthetic and also the theme down there of an eldritch horror kind of a deal, and I suspect that is where they come out of when they do come to the surface. In a lot of ways, I see the Underdark the same as creatures that live in deep trenches in the ocean, mysteriously beautiful in its own environment, but at the same time so alien and otherworldly that it definitely doesn't fit in the light of day, or with culture or civilized folk or herds. Though these creatures fit into almost any campaign setting, I think they flourish in an Underdark campaign like Out of the Abyss. Dungeon of the Mad Mage is another one where there would be good entries, and also Tomb of Annihilation because it has a lot of varied environments and crazy creatures. Speaking of Dungeon of the Mad Mage, is the first and second layers to the dungeon are already kind of picked clean. There's not a whole lot of new stuff that you can get from there, but if you thought to yourself as a DM, I could see them coming down and feeding off of the corpses around. So the first time your characters go down there, they'll see like little puddles of acid and like partially digested other adventurers or things like that. It would kind of give them a hint as to what's going on without giving them exactly what is happening down here, because it could be a lot of things or just dungeon dressing. They don't really know. Though it's not on the official list, I'd like to talk a bit about my favorite campaign setting when I was a teenager called Dark Sun. I bought the second edition AD&D book at a yard sale for Dark Sun, and I kind of fell in love with it because it had a lot of out-of-the-box thinking, and it made your characters survive in an environment that's not typical for a Dungeons & Dragons setting. It takes place on Athos, a desert world that's very hot and sort of an allegory for our own world in a way, because the world was actually destroyed by very powerful magic users, its environment that is, and they continue to be sort of the rulers of what's left, small cities that are, have tyrants as magical tyrants as rulers, and there's just sweeping wastelands full of people trying to get by and monsters and all kinds of stuff. Already, this kind of a book presents a challenge for the players because heavy armor can't be made out of metal, or else you just cook inside it during the day and then you freeze at night, because during the day it can get up to 130 degrees and then at night it goes immediately plummets down to below freezing. Water is very rare, and surviving means using the creatures you hunt to make better armor and weapons that can withstand the harsh elements. Because the creatures there are evolved to deal with those harsh elements, you kind of have to use your tool-making skill to adapt to the harsh environments with the creatures. Metal in that world becomes brittle, so bone is used for a lot of different things. It's used for weapons, it's used for armor. A lot of the time it's used for anything that you can think of that metal would typically be used for in a normal campaign. I can remember setting up a low-level encounter for PCs where the fighter, who was wearing light armor at the time because most medium and heavy armor was metal, could take down one of these things with his group and use the armored plates of the Ankheg to make heavy armor out of. And I can remember at the time, the person who was playing the fighter hated that he was using light armor. And when this was presented to him, it was an optional quest, but he immediately got the group all together and with him because they were like, yeah, our fighter needs some medium or heavy armor. He can't be doing this in like leather armor. So let's go get this right now and do this. It was kind of a team building experience. And I didn't really understand at the time, because I was a kid, I was at least 16, why the encounter felt so right. So such a good play experience. But I understand now, because instead of my players being given the armor they want, they were given something much less and then were told that they can earn that armor. They had the opportunity to earn the heavy armor with a small quest and an encounter. They didn't have to do it, but they chose to do it, and it felt like a good reward for the effort that they put in, which again, it was a side quest. So at the time we were playing during our lunchtime, and I think it took them all of maybe 2 or maybe 3 lunches. So I think grand total of maybe 2 hours, 2.5 hours to do the encounter and get the materials. And then of course they just came back, and at the time there was no official way to make armor, so I just kind of made it up and told them that it would take them like a couple of days or something, and they were real happy with it. Whenever he told the story of that character, it was always my fighter who slayed an Ankheg and made half plate out of its hide, not like my fighter who has half plate and has a big old sword or something like that. The whole campaign felt a lot like Monster Hunter, the video game, and I would love to revisit that in 5th edition to see if it would be as fun for my players now as it was for them then. At the time that we played it then, I had no inkling of Monster Hunter. It wasn't developed yet, but after playing Monster Hunter World, I really think this would be a fun sort of thing to do piggybacking off of that experience, but without super copying it in sort of a way. And then I have the feeling that each successful hunt in Dark Sun would not only give the characters the resources they needed to craft weapons, armor, and food, but it would also make their lives just a little bit easier in a world that is not easy. It's not the only way to make a successful campaign, but I think it would be a good way to shake things up and make items and weapons and armor the focus of the campaign rather than something that you are given, which is sort of very much a 5th edition staple. Our armor and weapons and items are something that you're given and then they're rarely upgraded throughout the campaign unless you find like a magical version of that, which is kind of rare. Since they are monstrosities with no intelligence, Ankhegs can't really be NPCs. Rather than going down the route of, well, a wizard could make one intelligent or a druid could maybe possibly awaken one with the DM fiddling with the rules, it's sometimes good to just let a monstrosity be what it is. It is uncomplicated and should probably stay that way so long as you or your PCs don't get frustrated. And when you give it tactics that it shouldn't have at its CR, then it becomes much more dangerous, I think. As for having these things as PCs, that's just straight out of the question. Nobody wants to play a mole simulator, and most of the time it seems like these things would wait underground as ambush predators. It wouldn't be particularly fun to play, and I couldn't see there being much role-playing opportunity in it. It's just not a good fit, and they should probably stay that way so that way you don't give them any type of like anthropomorphism, so you don't feel bad at exterminating them, because they are a nuisance. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Thanks for joining me for this 4th episode of Painting the Monster Manual and going down the sand-strewn halls of my memory for a deep dive into Ankhegs. Next episode, I'm going to go into Azers, of which I have never used or seen before today in a game. So that should be kind of fun, learning about a new type of creature. Maybe I can find a place to put them in my own campaign. Maybe find a way to put them in other types of campaigns or maybe even as NPCs or as a culture to be explored by my PCs. Until then, don't get pulled down undigested by an Ankheg. Thanks so much for watching.